Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa
Walaikum salam.
barakatuh. Um, I'm going to play the role of the student here, uh, Brother Anwar, and I welcome you again to our website and to our student portals. And it's a great honor to have you here with us. Um, why? Well, because we're seeking truth, and I think that's an honorable thing to do. You see, and the one of my students yesterday just asked me, "Well, who's a scholar? Who's a real scholar?" I said, "Well, the scholar is the warrior who doesn't stop at any um, objection, at any challenge to truth. He just keeps on pushing right through." And you know as well as I do that Islam is full of scholars who stopped pushing the margins, and they've accepted the imprisonment of tradition, and they've done it for a paycheck, so to speak. Well, I have had the privilege in my short tenure as a Muslim, it's been about 17 years now, um, to not have to do that, you see. And even when I was in positions where my salary was provided by traditional Islamic institutions, Allah protected me. And it was amazing to see how these people in these institutions, although they marginalized me, they let me alone to do what Allah wanted me to do. And that's kind of the miracle, you see, of Allah's refuge in the middle of in the middle of people who are avoiding true scholarships. So my effort at True Scholarship has led me to people like you and others who have have their more than a foot in the door in of the Arab institutions which have misguided the Ummah for the last 1,200 years or so. Now, I don't, I was with these people, but I don't have the traditional background. I don't have the Arabic knowledge. Matter of fact, I'm not good at language at all. If I try to think of something in Spanish or in Malay or in a Thai word, it's funny because the words that I'm looking for come back to me in German, which I learned a little bit of when I was a soldier in Germany years ago. So I'm not good with languages. So they kept on saying, "Oh, you got to learn Arabic. You got to learn Arabic." And I said, "Well, not me, because I'm one of those 90% of the male population that just doesn't have this gift for languages." And I'm sure as an educationist, you've learned some of those statistics. Girls have a better linguistic faculty than men do. That's why they make the diplomatic corps as translators for the most part. Most people don't know this, and a lot of people don't think that this is important. I had students, my dear brother, Muslim students in Malaysia, who would come to me and said, "I'm 21, I'm 22 years old, I want to get married. I don't know how to earn a living. I've spent all my time memorizing Arabic and I still don't understand it." You see, I had conversations with so called Hafiz, and they could recite the Quran beautifully, but they could not tell me what it meant. You see, then when I saw that, I said, "Well, this is misguidance. This is not right." Why? Because it's not logical. You see, it doesn't make any sense. Why would you raise young men and waste their time when they can't use the language? Or the excuse is, "Oh, okay, well, we've got this um, religious piety, and they're going to add so many trees to their garden in Jannah when they finally make it, if they finally make it." That's not a good reason. And I considered that misguidance. So, brother, when I uh, um, finally had a few years amongst the company of Alim, and they were promoting these kinds of programs, which were wasting the times and the talents of their children and pushing them into futility, and not only futility, but a kind of, how should I say, this political apathy, you see, that you encountered. The things that are important, they don't do anything about. But the things that seem to have to do with some sort of perceived impulse, insult to their religious piety, they would take to the streets for that. And so justice is lost in such a mindset, in such a polity. So I'm so glad to be in the company of yourself and others who are honoring truth to the best of our ability. Now, in our search for truth, I know that as a doctor, there's this subject called pathology, you see. And when we want to understand disease, we want to understand what they call the etiology of the disease. How does it start? How does it progress? Because in understanding that, you can also come to an understanding of how to do two things: prevent it and cure it, you see. So, um, the same thing has to do with the misguidance of any polity, Muslim, Buddhist, it doesn't make any difference. There's a misguidance that took place. And in my study of the history of religious societies, it usually takes place within 200 to 300 years after the death of the person who brought the message, okay, that established that particular movement, whether it's Buddhism or Hinduism or whatever the case might be. There's something. If you listen to somebody like what's his name, John Campbell, a historian, a mythologist, he and others of his ilk who are very high up in the academic circles and legitimate, authentic academic circles, they say, and they have determined that myth always has a source in truth, and that this source becomes deviant over a period of time. For example, the referents are lost in the mythological language, the origins of the language. The referents are lost. Referents, reference. So what happens is, for example, Homer was put on the dock, put in the dock because his referents were lost, and people thought in his age that he was committing blasphemy. You see, because they no longer understood his language. That generation no longer understood the language of his grandfathers, you see. And so when he would write something and using a poetic imagery that represented a matter of fact of truth, they didn't understand what he was talking about, and they wanted to kill him, put him to death for blasphemy, you see. So this sort of thing happens repeatedly in the history of mankind. So when I heard your brief history and introduction in our first meeting together online, I was really impressed because you did what I always do. When I find something new, I want to go back to the person and I want to know their history. I want to know how they developed to the point of where it is that I came in contact with them. And you gave this history. You found a certain degree of apathy both in South Africa and in Egypt amongst the Muslim brotherhoods there in respective countries. And then you wanted to get to the root of why this was. Why is it that these people are avoiding the activities, the actions which would correct injustice, you see? And so and then that led you to this point where you then began to uh, study further. But you're not just like me. I have a foot in the door. You're actually in the door. You see, you're in the room of Islam. You are in Darul Islam. You see, and I'm kind of an outsider with my foot in the secular world and also in the Islamic world. And one of my critics said, well, you better listen to Dr. Omar because he's got a foot in both worlds. And so he can create some sort of a synthesis which will allow you to have a balance. So I'm going to use that gift that Allah has given me, this gift of synthesis, to try to extract from you, dear brother, what you have learned as you looked more carefully in the house of Islam. You see,
Mm.
where did it go wrong? Who's responsible? You know, when you tell students you want them to write an essay, you want to know several things: who, what, where, when, why, and how. Okay, so
Mm.
and so please, brother, tell us what you discovered in this book.
Dr. Zaid, firstly, let me thank you for the honor is mine to appear on your uh, program and with your group. I can assure you that I'm less than what you think of me. But as Imam Ali says, maybe more than my enemies. I'm less than what my friends think of me, and more than what my enemies think of me. I think there's a,
Yes,
I,
alhamdulillah.
I, you know, on the topic of who is a scholar, a very excellent teacher that I had, who's still alive, said to me once that who is a scholar? A scholar is he or she who will pursue truth no matter the cost, firstly. Secondly, who will defend it. And thirdly, who will confront those who oppose it.
Mm,
So definitely there's an element of courage in defining yourself as a scholar. And that is why I'm always reluctant to portray myself as a scholar. I'm an humble, aspiring scholar, perhaps. And I also pray as you that Allah will guide me and open the way for me. Because it's often not really the text and your own agenda that leads you to truth, but the other dramas that unfold in your life that actually sort of nudge you in the right direction. And I feel often, as with my own history, that it's often been those dramas and those life events outside of my study program that have led me to in directions that were, turned out to be beneficial. So, what I saw in Egypt, Dr. Zayed, was unfortunately like the movie The Wizard of Oz.
mhm,
If you think of that iconic movie in Western culture, then it's about Dorothy who lives in a mundane world in Kansas,
mhm,
and who then has this amazing, fabulous vision of an exceptional and extraordinary, great, dazzling world out there, and the man behind it being the Wizard of Oz. And he spends so much effort trying to discover or to meet this great character of her imagination, only to find out that it's just a regular guy sitting behind a couple of levers and controlling a lot of effects.
mhm,
I think that was what Egypt was to me, and it is not really the language or the scholarship or the school system in Egypt that has been the education that I benefited from Egypt, but rather the removal of the blinkers or the removal of the imagined reality that I had in my mind. And I
mhm,
always imagined there's a beautiful scholarship out there in the Arab world, and if I could only make it there
mhm,
and meet these great characters, these great sheikhs and imams, and
mhm,
because these people are so highly praised, often in my own community, the people will
mhm,
refer to sheikh this and sheikh that, and the eminence of this sheikh and that. And I think the benefit of visiting Egypt for 2 years was really that I realized that there's nothing besides what we have here. And I
mhm,
can break that news to you also, brother, that your own scholarship is much more valuable than you would give yourself credit for. The Muslim world, in fact, Al Azhar, is a frozen body of information. It is frozen for 1,000 years and more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the specialization is they specialize in reproducing material, information, ideas that they've inherited from
Mm-hmm.
centuries back.
Mm-hmm.
It is a stultified system of knowledge. And
Mm-hmm.
we know, and you as a physician know, that knowledge has got a sell-by date. Much of what we deal with in knowledge and is there's a certain time and a certain context associated with a lot of knowledge. And so, if you are, for example, if you look at some of the textbooks in Egypt, they would still express the division of the will or division of the zakah or charity in terms of camels and in terms of you know grains of rice or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so the not even the measurements, the units of measurement, not even that they've not even been able to update those. So the knowledge is really stultified, it is frozen in time. And believe me, that is not even the worst aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the worst experience I had, and I'm not shooting down Egypt, because I will say in a, in its benefit, is that I've never seen an Islamic brotherhood, sisterhood, solidarity as I've seen it in the Muslim lands, in the Arab world. And not, I would maybe not say the Arab worlds, but in a country like Egypt. And I do
Mm-hmm.
believe I've seen it maybe in some other neighboring Arab countries in North Africa. There's a certain
Mm-hmm.
solidarity there, which
Mm-hmm.
has struck me, which is absent in the West. And I would more or less count myself sort of like maybe slightly in your position, where I'm living in a anti-religious, secular society.
Mm-hmm.
The status quo in my country is more or less very secular, very godless,
Yes.
very pro-Western, um, sort of wholesale importation of anything that is any liberal, ultra-liberal idea that is promoted in America or in the West is just absorbed wholesale in my country. So I say that from this perspective of a Westerner, that
Mm-hmm.
if when I traveled to Egypt, I found that solidarity to be very striking. That brotherhood, sisterhood in society, and that is something I really took away from there, and that is something I think enriches my scholarship or my research, because I don't think we as scholars should be developing ideas or pursuing ideas that are created for the internet or for computers or for books, but our ideas should enrich society, and
Mm-hmm.
our ideas should add quality to society. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel that even that little bit of Islam that remains is enough to enrich that society with an immense amount of solidarity. And I can't express it to you, but there are so many incidents that would bear out what I'm trying to tell you, that
Mm-hmm.
solidarity, it permeates every fiber of society. And it's just things that I experienced there that I will carry with me. As far as the schooling system is concerned, however, unfortunately, those teachers have a complete disinterest in what they are teaching. They're going through the motions. It's detached from their real concerns in their lives. Most of them are there to earn a month's wages and to, gladly just, be passionate about other things in their lives. Like art is big, cultural music, etc., are big in Egypt. Religion has become a sort of a grudge affiliation, or sort of something that you have to be affiliated to, but it's not really the essence or the foundation of your existence, which it should be, I believe, the way you see Allah, the way you see the universe, etc. So I'm just trying to put in context to you my visit to Egypt and my experiences. The Arabic language, of course, what I can say is that it's overrated. The competency in the Arabic language might be overrated. If I speak English, and I speak also a form of Dutch, which we call Afrikaans here. And then I also I have a few words in the local African languages. And what I can tell you is that my strongest language when it comes to writing is English, but I can by no means claim to be a master of English. I might have a fairly substantial vocabulary, but if I do real research, I still need to go to the dictionaries or go to the books and try and contextualize the word. And the same goes for Arabic. The Arabic that people speak, the average guy in a Muslim country or an Arab country, is a vocabulary of approximately 600 to 800 words. And by no means does that offer a substantial advantage to the student of the Quran. It is a well-known fact that the best grammarians or the best students of Arabic are, in fact, the Christian Arabs. I don't know if you were aware of that. And some of the very best dictionaries in Arabic, contemporary dictionaries, are in fact created and developed by Christian Arabs. So on the Arabic language, all I can say is that do not overrate the knowledge of the language. There are so many excellent dictionaries and excellent texts online where you could, in fact, enable yourself to do very, very thorough research without having a daily conversational ability in Arabic. So I just thought, those are a few points that you've raised that I maybe could offer you that on. As far as this discussion, maybe we should just maybe think, where would you like us to go with this? My uncovering or my research into history and the idea that Islam or the Quran could have undergone some sort of misinterpretation at some very early point is not an end in itself. That aspect of my research is not an end in itself. It's become pretty much a component. And I often get the feeling that within the Quran or the modern day Ahlul Quran or, revisionist groups that you get on the internet, the idea of revision is an end in itself. And I regard myself as a social transformation agent. And I need to revise these historical realities, not for the sake of scoring points and having a great following on YouTube and having a lot of people telling me ideas are fantastic. But the idea for me is so that I could reshape my strategy in terms of the vision, the mission we have for transforming our societies. And I'm not necessarily talking about changing the government in my country or changing the order. That's a process I leave in Allah's hands. I'm pretty much looking at my own home, my own self, and to see. I've got children. I've got grown children who have I have one grandchild also, and that is my first priority: is to see what course do we plot, and that is a sound course that is based on solid evidence. And I think I just distinguish or differentiate myself from those who treat the revision of the reading of the Quran or Islam as a pastime, as an end in itself. I actually have a serious problem with that, and then it
Hmm.
becomes very touchy subject, because if you have a slight difference, then you are basically then interfering with somebody's whole reason for their existence. If somebody believes that Jesus will return one day, and you have a different view, and I just find that people become so strong, they become puritanical almost
Yes.
in their beliefs, and the belief is not, the Quran never really uses the word belief in an isolated way. It uses belief with practice. So
Hmm.
believe alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat. So I can't even think of a place in the Quran where belief is separated from practice.
Yes.
And I can't see myself as just being a scholar and just a researcher as an end in itself. That's a very Western or Eurocentric approach to knowledge, is to make knowledge and endeavor all on its own, detached from the program of social development or social enrichment. And so, yeah, my videos, what you will see, or I do not necessarily revise or question historical misperceptions or deviations, but I also look at present day, and I find that very um, inspiring in your own work, Dr. Zaid. That what I notice from your work is that you've got your feet firmly planted within the social challenges of our time. And alhamdulillah, that is how it should be. We had
Hmm.
a COVID problem recently. We have other issues, and I notice in your work you are not shy. You don't shy away from positioning yourself in all of these matters, and that adds the element of courage within the scholar's work, because the scholar who is operating in the safe zone, I don't believe in the safe
Yes.
zone. It's not a place for a real, genuine scholar. We should be operating within a zone where there's real emotions and real feelings and real enemies function operating.
Well, you bring up an interesting concept here, because this continuity between our understanding of divine order and our praxis of it is nothing new. The ancient societies that developed higher cultures, even those in Africa now, which have been destroyed for the most part by Western influences, always had this in mind. There were rites of passages on the road to maturity that incorporated this knowledge that there was a continuum. Now, there are people now who are considering, so, okay, well, we've got occult doctrines that date back to Tehuti of Egypt, but no, they're all much older than that. As above, so below. If
Mm.
you look at the ancient Chinese cultures, their entire culture was established on this principle. That is, that there's nothing that we do on earth that is separate from heaven, you see. So the scholars' challenge is to maintain that continuity. And that's why I have worded my webinars in terms of guidance, because that's what guidance is supposed to do.
Mm.
We are all on the path of guidance. Instead of being, I agree with Dr. Hani's interpretation recently of this concept of the Mahdi. The Mahdi is a misinterpretation or misunderstanding of the actual word that's used in the Quran. And so the Mahdi, according to him, is someone who considers himself to be guided. I am the guided one, you see. So, no, no, no. We're all on the path of guidance. So, this path of guidance is supposed to maintain that continuity between heaven and earth, so that things are done in a justifiable manner that is understandable in terms that make moral and ethical sense. So now we're living in a world where scholarship has divorced itself from morality and from ethics. And it seems that way also within the Islamic world as well.
mm,
If you look at it very very carefully, the morals and ethics that are in the Quran, which are very very clearly and explicitly stated in the Quran, are not being practiced in the Islamic courts. And this is a result of this stultification that you mentioned several minutes ago that you found in Egypt. There's a crystallization, there's a solidification that has stopped the fluidity, this fluid flow between heaven and earth. It's a
mm,
constant motion. Everything in the universe is constantly in motion. And when you
mm,
stop that flow, when you stop the flux of what actually happens at the subatomic level, you're ignoring what we call kun faya kun. We're ignoring the angelic input. We're ignoring what it is that Allah has placed in the world as the creative word, according to what the Christians use the term logos, you see.
mm.
And so this is amazing. Well, not amazing, but it is the reality. This is, the Muslims have separated themselves from this flow. They're outside the flow, and it's as if they're trying to observe something, and they can't really touch it. You see,
Yeah,
I have
yeah.
just written a book on the concept of trust, and inshallah, it would be published this year. Now, let me just interject this because I think it's very important. You see, having to do with this, well, we want to touch heaven. We don't want to touch heaven, in the hereafter. We want to touch it now. This is why,
Mm,
if you can't touch it now, you see, then you're entering into futility. And the Quran makes it very, very clear that the rewards of Allah are for here and hereafter, not just for hereafter. And
yeah,
I think a certain element of the Alim have separated themselves from the here and spent too much time trying to imagine the hereafter. Uh, I don't spend too much time on the hereafter. I mention it every now and then. And of course, when I think about the hereafter, I just want not to go to hell. Okay, that's if I get someplace in the smallest corner of heaven,
yeah.
that's fine for me. Okay, but
Mm,
I just don't want to go to hell. All right, because for me, that's a god awful reality because it's a complete cutoff from God's grace. But what I'm talking about is touching God's grace now in the
mm,
here. And that requires men to activate those mechanisms, those social organizations, those social constructions that will assure justice, you see. And that's not happening. It's not happening in the Ummah. It's not happening amongst the Alim. It's not happening, certainly in the secular world. Everybody pays it lip service. But let me take this a step further now, because trust, the trusted one, that was a title given to our beloved prophet. You see, he was the trusted one. Amana was invested in him. So
mm,
now we have young students coming up, the next generation and the several generation of Muslims, and they don't experience this trust. You see, where is the trust? The trust has been misplaced. It's been misplaced in the wrong approach to the wrong avenues that do not touch heaven, and they don't bring heaven to earth. So there is no as above, so below. And if there is, it's the wrong above that's
mm,
being generated here on earth because justice is wanting. I only know that I exist if I reach out and touch you, you see. And this is a very sensual thing. Now, I can touch you with my mind, with my words, maybe with my writing. I can touch you. I can even touch your heart. But there's something more precious than that, and that is the actual reaching out to touch the flesh of another human being that lets you know, yes, I am, and he or she also is. You see, and so this allowing us to um, touch each other in trust, trusting that we're not going to betray each other. This is an element, a dimension that is missing in Islam. I
Mm.
know it goes into the business world. The people I don't want to do business with are Muslims. They can't be trusted. They can't be trusted. So if they have been brought up for 1200 years under this system, and when I saw that years ago that they can't be trusted, they give you your word, they can't be trusted. There's no John Wayne, element there. I give you my word, no. They give you your word, and then they say they have a caveat, inshallah, which
Yeah,
means if God does it, then maybe I'll tag along. Okay. Um,
yeah,
it's That's not what inshallah means. Inshallah
yeah.
means I will do it with the help of God. Okay,
Mm, mm,
that doesn't
mm.
mean I wait for God to do it. It means I step forward, and then
Yeah,
Allah will help me. If I throw, Allah throws with me, and that's also part of what's in the Quran. There, if
mm,
my father, what is the principle is here? If I take a step towards Allah, He runs to me. Okay,
mm,
so Allah is my friend, and um, I don't mean that in an arrogant way. I mean that in a very, very intimate way because I have experienced what it is I'm trying to express here. It's not easy to express this thing. I
mm.
have experienced the touch of God,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
know He's my friend. I
Mm,
know this
mm,
from personal experience. I know this from dreams, from visions, from what has happened in my life. Pain or no pain, it doesn't make any difference. In the
mm,
end, when I take that step off the cliff, Allah catches me each and
mm.
every time, you see. And this world is constantly a test of that iman that you were talking about. This
Mm.
iman, this faith, it's there. It's become an abstract concept. It's something
Yeah.
that's talked about. It's spoken all the time, but to activate it is
Mm.
what's missing in the Ummah. And this, see, you call yourself an activist. Well, why is that? Well, because when you take action, you see results, cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect. It's one of the
Mm.
principal laws of the universe. So
Yeah,
this is what's missing, dear brother.
yeah, yeah,
If we
yeah.
want heaven on earth, we have to bring it. We don't wait for Mahdi. We don't wait for Jesus to return. We don't
Mm.
wait for God's help.
Yeah,
God helps those who help themselves. Okay.
yeah,
So I
yeah,
think you've learned that principle. And
yeah.
I think if I'm guessing correctly, you found it missing in the Ummah and also missing amongst the Alim, those careful creatures who, you know, for the most part, have never held a real job.
Absolutely. You know, Dr. Zaid, let me. You've touched on a lot of important issues there. And if I really want to respond, I don't think we'll have time. But I think maybe to offer you a nice model of understanding, because this is
Hmm.
what my doctoral thesis was on. I investigated coloniality, which is the colonization of the mind.
Yes.
And I think it's not such a bad sort of idea to apply to the Muslim world. Because I do find the Muslim mind, the Muslim world as a whole, is a colonized world, is a mentally and intellectually colonized world. And what I my research led me to the work of social scientists who
Hmm.
look at the idea of mental reflectiveness and reflection, how people reflect on their realities. And what the idea that is advanced by some scholars is that people will generally go along if the superstructure, which in Islam's case is a cultural structure, when that cultural structure is complementary to their own concerns and their own reality, then they will generally excel and the structure will excel. But when that structure becomes contradictory to people's real life concerns and realities, then the problem that will emerge is that there will be a conflict between what people desire, what they pursue, what they find, important, and what the structure offers them. And we're living in a time, and not just now, I think for the past 1,000 years and more, where the Muslim adherent or the member of the Muslim Ummah has a complete and absolute disjuncture and detachment between
Mm-hmm.
his own personal concerns in his life or her life and the cultural body or structure to which they belong. Now, what happens when people experience such a contradiction? They do one of three things. The first thing they do is they compel themselves to comply with the structure. So they will go along with the structure at their own cost and they will sacrifice their own concerns. That's the first option. And I think
Mm-hmm.
if we want to look at those people, and you can count the Tabligh Jamaat, the ISIS types, and these are people who, at the cost of really being real and being citizens of the world, become sort of lost crazies that would like to pursue and perpetuate a system that is 1,000 years antiquated. The
Mm-hmm.
second type of person would be the person that would simply rebel and completely confront the system. And
Mm-hmm.
those would be Muslims that become non-Muslims, that become murtad. They
Mm-hmm.
simply out of Islam. And there's a growing body of ex-Muslims that you can see on the internet and in the West also. People who simply abandon Islam because they just can't see themselves. I've got friends like that.
Mm-hmm.
They've just simply checked out. They tell me plain and simple, look, my dad, he's a crazy guy. He wants to beat me up for this and that. He says it's the Quran tells him to do it. And I don't count myself as a Muslim. My name
Mm-hmm.
is still Muhammad, whatever, but I do anything that I like to do. I drink, I live with a woman, etc., etc. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that is the second response, is to completely reject it. And the third is the majority. The third response, when people find this contradiction between their own concerns, their reality, and the superstructure in which they belong, the cultural structure, is to circumvent the structure. In other
Mm-hmm.
words, to, 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 as the Quran says, to take their religion for play. So, in other words, it is to make a false to act as if they are part of the structure, but to really develop a split personality. And
Yes.
what I
Mm-hmm.
see probably a lot in your society, and what I also see, is that Muslims have developed a sort of a dual identity.
Mm-hmm.
So they would be at work, they would have one identity when they're at work and in
Mm-hmm.
society, and then they would have a different identity when they attend a Muslim funeral or the Friday prayers. And they have these dual value systems which they carry around. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
their loyalty to the Muslim value system is higher, so they pay lip service to both, in fact. And so this is the biggest group. This is the group of people that are really they in a they basically, their lives are a confusion because they believe that is and for many years I could count myself amongst those people that had a dual set of values, principles. I would even count the Muslims as my real brothers, and these other non-Muslim people are the pretend brothers. I have to act like I'm loyal to them, but really
Hmm.
just have to go along and fake it, just to go get ahead in the world of work, and you know.
Hmm.
So those that now the question is, how do you tackle it? Because I believe that that analysis, or that model of looking at the Muslim world, it seems very, very um, sort of helpful in analyzing the status of the Muslim world. Now, obviously, what we do need is we need to take that superstructure, that cultural structure called Islam, and we obviously need to re examine it. We need to restructure it. We need to change it. And some people say you need to reform it. I don't believe in reform. I believe that Islam was actually never the changes that came about came about after the Prophet's time. So I'm not asking for the message of the Prophet to be restructured. Um, you know, so I think what we need to do is we need to eliminate this conflict, this contradiction between the Islamic culture, the system, the body of knowledge, the body of understanding, the worldview, and the reality. And that is part of the scholar's work, is to interpret the realities we face in our world. And we have a world fraught with major challenges. You know, much of your work, I noticed, I haven't read your books in detail, Dr. Zaid, but what I could see was, take, for example, uh, the recent or the ongoing COVID so-called pandemic.
Hmm.
Um, as Muslims, there's been absolutely no independent response. They've simply taken and adopted whatever the Western scholars, and with Western scholars with Muslim names and with Christian names, they've just wholesale adopted whatever emanated
Yes.
scholarship. And we know the Western scholarship is not independent. Western scholarship,
No, it's not.
to a large extent, if you go to any university and you look at who are funding the masters and the PhDs, you will quickly see who the people are that are advancing knowledge at the universities. It would be the Kellogg Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation. Uh,
Yes,
it, it, these are people with an agenda. So knowledge is
of
not,
course.
and but Muslims as a whole, and hopefully we are hopeful that people like yourself and others that are in our ilk maybe will will develop an independent body of scholarship where we can formulate real life positions on, let's say, for example, COVID, and we could come up with an independent. You, as a physician, would be an excellent person, for example, to develop an independent position drawn from the Quran, drawn from the Islamic core principles and values, to develop an independent position that is not tainted by big business or by corporate money. And inshallah, I think that is, I see where the problem lies and how scholars could approach it. What do you think?
Well, my position is not to establish any kind of a movement. My position is to be like water, and then or a willow branch. You know, when the wind is blowing, kind of bend with it. You know, but you don't change your essence. And if you're like water, then you go where you can flow, and you fill whatever that vacuum is. I
Mm,
hope to, even with what we're doing here, my goal is to fill the vacuum of ignorance with
mm,
useful knowledge. And sometimes the knowledge is practical, most times it's not. But it's not so that it's impractical. What I'm looking for is to establish understanding, because if you don't understand the nature of the problem, you cannot solve it. And if you understand the nature of a problem, you can then assess it and say, oh, that problem I cannot fix. This one I can fix, but that problem I cannot fix. And there's many examples you can make here. So, what my goal with my work is to help people understand the nature of the reality that they are confronting with all of these compounded social problems and fitna that's going on. Because once you understand it, then you can sort of breathe this great sigh of relief and say, okay, now that I understand it, let's see what I can roll my sleeves up and see which one I can fix or how I can approach the problem. Because
mm,
without understanding the problem, you can't even begin to approach it. You just kind of stand there in a fixed perspective. You're frozen, as the Ummah has been now for 1,200 years. They can't fix the problem because they're frozen in the wrong perspective. So my goal is to correct the perspective so they can then fix it. And I've seen this happen in the lives of a few of my students. They breathe this great big sigh of relief, then they understand they're not guilty, of committing some heinous crime by not obeying some foolish tradition, you see. And once they are released from that prison, then they can solve the problem that was perplexing them or keeping them in prison. They can move on. They can approach their destiny with greater freedom, with greater joy. Because
mm,
that's one of the things I see missing in the Ummah. I was really amazed at that because there's very little joy that I see in the Ummah. I see this professionally polished piety that everybody smiles and they say Alhamdulillah, Assalamu alaikum, and Inshallah, and they're shaking hands and kissing each other on the cheek, but there's no sincerity. Or if
mm,
there is sincerity, it's at the superficial level of this understanding that everyone just goes along with to keep the peace. Now, there's
mm,
nothing wrong with keeping the peace. You don't need to
mm,
go and slap your neighbor in the face with some god awful truth in order to get them riled up.
mm,
But you do have to be prepared as a teacher, and you
mm,
understand what that means. You see, I'm a
mm.
doctor, but the doctor in the root word for doctor means teacher, you see.
Oh,
And so as teachers, we have to prepare ourselves to be there when the student is ready to receive what Allah has placed in us, you see. So
mm,
I don't see myself as someone who's going to stand up on the podium at Grand Central Park and say, the world is coming to an end, and here's what we got to do to fix it. No, 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 no.
mm.
I wait for the student to appear. I'm the
Mm.
teacher who's waiting for the student to appear,
Absolutely.
and there are
Mm,
students out there who are waiting for the teacher to appear. And so I think that it, my wish, my hope, my desire, my prayer is for activities like we're now presently engaged in,
mm,
is to be there when the students need us. You
mm,
see, and to
mm,
work collectively to that, because to work in isolation is well, it's dangerous for one
mm,
thing, because you can go off on a tangent, and there's no one there in your own little shura. You don't have a shura.
mm,
You have to have a senate. You have to have a censor, someone there to correct you when you're wrong, and say, "Oh
mm,
no, 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 Anwar, this is how it really is," or "Oh
mm,
no, no, Doctor Omar, you're wrong about that word. That's not what it means." Okay,
mm,
and so if we work collectively and we form a sort of a council of elders. You see, you know what that means in the
mm,
African context. There's always a circle of elders, and they're the
mm,
ones who make the real decisions. At least they used to be.
mm.
In a non secular world, they were the ones who connected heaven to earth, all
Yeah.
right, with the right justified decision making process. And it was always in a circle. The Native Americans had the same tradition. Well, where does this come from? It's natural outflow of Fitra. It's how
Mm,
Fitra evolves. in the mature world of the elders. They sit in a circle and they pass the talking stick one to the other, and they take their turns giving their informed opinions. Now, they don't all have to be scholars, but they are all who are in that circle. They have knowledge from experience. They have wisdom from experience. They have
mm,
wisdom from years of sitting on that rock looking at the sunset. You know,
yeah,
they're 75 years old and they've seen things that, the 25-year-old person has not seen. You see,
mm, mm,
so
mm,
if we can form that kind of a circle, even if it's virtual here online, I think that would be a wonderful
mm,
manifestation of Allah's grace,
yeah,
and that
absolutely.
it would be an answer to my prayer. And so, uh, with that being said, maybe we could try to set aside an hour or so every week to do this, and. For example, if next Wednesday you can set aside this time again,
Mm, mm,
then what? Well, I'll announce to my students that we're going to have Q&A with
yeah,
Dr. Omar and Anwar.
yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
and uh, and then we'll just have an open forum and let the
Mm,
questions flow in. And
yeah,
if they want to address you, or if they want to address me, or if there's a collective question they want an answer perspective from both of us, I think that
yeah.
would be wonderful, inshallah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Look, what I did find was that there's a great thirst for questions around everyday issues that people are confronting. But that's fine. I think it's not always going to be a philosophical take on the problem, and
Mm-hmm.
so that I think that would make for maybe it's a bit more relatable for some younger members of your forum, because
Mm-hmm.
the old guys, we like to philosophize and I'd like to look at the models, and but the questions often would surprise you in the mundane nature of the questions, and but it
Mm-hmm.
would be very, very interesting. And I think in my own research, in my dealings, and I have a small circle here, or a group, or a class,
Mm-hmm.
whatever you call it. Um, and I noticed that most of my questions also would relate to practices, to
Mm-hmm.
ideas that people are used to doing, but they find it uncomfortable or difficult to associate with, or and they raise it. Well, in my society, we wouldn't have issues like female circumcision. Those are complete and utter taboos here already. But
Mm-hmm.
as a more of a Western society, and even the Muslim community being much more westernized here, they would still have questions around Islamic practices,
Mm-hmm.
um, that they would then try to deal with. My own approach is I've done a survey of the very core ideas, the very core doctrines,
Mm-hmm.
and I've written, actually not written, I've translated a small booklet called Muzakiratul Firaq, the a treatise on the sects of
Mm-hmm.
Aqidah, core
Mm-hmm.
doctrine sects in Islam.
Mm-hmm.
I've made that translation, and that little booklet has turned out to be very helpful. I've done the translation approximately 20 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and it does set out the core beliefs of the Ahli Sunnah, the Ash'ari, the Zaidi, the Mu'tazila, or the rationalists.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be useful to maybe visit when we do have a session again. It would be interesting to visit the core doctrines, because
Mm-hmm.
you alluded to one of them when you said the Muslims use this insha'Allah as an
Yes.
escape tactic,
Mm-hmm.
to sort of like absolve themselves from committing to
Yes.
their promises. Uh, it goes back very, very deep, and it's very
Yes.
common in fact. If you travel to the Muslim world, it's ingrained in the fabric of society, is that people are
Yes.
soft on their commitments because they
Yes.
simply disbelieve that God is the creator of my actions. I'm not the master of my own actions. And it's a very core
Yes.
belief in the Sunnah, Ahli Sunnah, Ash'ari uh,
Yes.
final school, which is in
Yes.
fact opposed by the rationalist school,
Mm-hmm.
the Mu'tazila school. So I think
Mm-hmm.
these are, I'm just giving you a taste of the issues we might visit, is in terms of core doctrines, how core doctrines enable this misbehavior or this poor social
Yes.
practices, and
Yes,
then
that I
taking.
think that would be very helpful for students to understand, because what you're talking about is etiology, how it evolved, how this thing
Mm,
got planted in Islam, and then how the doctrine evolved and how
mm,
it is now manifesting. You see,
absolutely.
yes,
Mm. Looking
we
forward to it.
with God's help we can do such things, but we keep the forum open
Mm,
for people to and for students and for colleagues, you see, to enter into the conversation, because I'm sure that there are a
mm,
lot of alim out there who have been listening, for example, to me for years, and perhaps to yourself, and they have questions of their own. You see,
mm,
I
mm,
don't want to get into a boxing match with these people, but and I will certainly, have Brother Kamal and others sit behind and maybe even screen the questions, because there's no
mm,
point in getting into a boxing match. I don't like debates. I never
mm,
liked debates. It's just another stage act, as far as
mm,
I'm concerned. Um, no, it's different if you're truly supporting informed positions, but most
mm,
people are not, because the purpose of a debate is to focus on the truth, not to show which one is more correct, because
mm.
both perspectives usually bear some margin of error. You see,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then what happens in the debate is that people are usually trying to show a one-upsmanship, and I don't think that that's what we need. What we need is a cooperative. We need
Mm,
we don't need the Western concept of competition here. We need cooperation between
mm,
the scholars, so that the students, as a teacher, the same thing happens in the school system. The parents want the support of the teachers, and the teachers want the support of the parents as they
mm,
are guiding their children. So if the parents and the teachers are at odds, that creates a great deal of confusion in
mm,
the students. So I don't want to have any hand in that. But if we can agree to disagree, and then still promote a conversation,
mm,
along certain lines that are going to help people understand. For
mm,
example, you might say something, and I might say, well, that's an Islamic perspective, but let me give you the Greek perspective, or let me give you
mm,
the Chinese perspective on that thing. And then you're all looking at the elephant from, different perspectives. And, one sees the tail, one sees the trunk. And if you paint the whole picture, then you've got an imagination of what the elephant really is.
mm,
So that's what I'm looking for in this kind of endeavor, dear brother. And
mm.
with God's help, I'm sure we can probably be of benefit to each other and also
Inshallah.
to our
Mm,
students. I'm not interested. I'm like you. I'm not interested. I turn my comments off. I'm not interested in comments.
mm.
I don't respond to them. I'm not interested in numbers.
Yeah.
I have some friends who show me, what the numbers are on the website, and I look at them. I say, oh, well, that's nice. Then I go
Yeah.
right back to my book. You see, because
Absolutely. Mm,
my faith is my iman is absolute. I don't
mm,
I don't depend on my knowledge of the numbers. I depend on my knowledge of my relationship with Allah, moment to moment to moment, you see. And that's where my strength comes from as I wield this sword of scholarship,
mm.
inshallah.
Alhamdulillah.
So,
Absolutely.
with that being said, brother, can we set the same time aside for next week?
Yes, we can set the same time. Would be fine
Very
with
good.
me next.